Hi, a couple of years ago I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis, and like many others out there, I now have boxes of shame, legions of unpainted minis. Now this is my underdog story. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures. Hello guys and gals out there. Today we're gonna paint some rust monsters from Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures from Wizkids. Now I am looking forward to utilizing these because I have some people in my party that have very much armor. First thing, as always, clean the model. They've been quite smart with the mold lines on these. It seems like most of the mold lines are in the ridges, so there really wasn't all of that much to actually do in terms of cleaning it, but there were some small sort of mold lines and flash lines here and there, and like you see, I have two of them, and they're pre-primed with I think some sort of Vallejo bright gray. First thing I'm going to do is to just get them attached to their bases, and for that I'm going to use my standard Gorilla Glue, which you should know by now that I love dearly. I don't know, I have two kinds of super glue. It's either Gorilla Glue or what's the other one called? Can't even remember, but the other one doesn't set as quickly or isn't as sticky, so that's why I prefer the actual Gorilla Glue. That plus there I can actually brush it out with some sort of resemblance of a brush. But yeah, I get these models stuck on their bases, and then I just use the toothbrush to remove some of the small particles that I got loose when cleaning up some of the mold lines. So I'm starting this project using matte white, and what I'm going to do is actually to use a dry brush, and I'm going to do sort of a version of Zenithal priming. Zenithal is really about getting highlights and shadows sort of defined, and what I'm trying to do here is to hit all of the sort of raised edges of the model in order to get something that's brighter than the gray, actually quite bright gray that the models are pre-primed with. Now you might be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And well, I'm gonna reveal that soon, but we're gonna be working a lot with somewhat transparent colors, so I want to have all the help I can get, and to sort of partly see the model but also sort of get that extra highlight. And I think you can see a difference between the left and the right one there, and here both of them have actually been dry brushed with white. So once the dry brush has really sort of dried out, it's very important this time around that you have to let the white really dry, because we're going to come in with some quite flowy, wet paint that might otherwise sort of rub up. And I'm going to be using rust that I bought from Vallejo Model Effects. I think originally these are supposed to be used for like cars and metal and stuff, but I figured, hey, if we're painting rust monsters, why not use rust? So I started out with, I think, the light one, because I sort of wanted just to get it over most parts of the body, and at this point I'm not exactly sure what the result will be. This is literally the first time I've ever used this rust wash, but it flows on pretty good. It sort of behaves like, I would say, like an ink from Vallejo. Not nearly as much perhaps pigment in it, but it sort of feels in its viscosity similar to the Vallejo inks. In terms of viscosity and washes, I tend to think that army painters are the thickest, and then Citadel, and then perhaps Vallejo in terms of sort of how thick the actual washes, and I don't really have a preference per se. It's a little bit for me depending on what I want to do with it. And like, you know, I love my inks, so this one, since it does remind me a lot about how it flows about ink, I'm just trying to get basically the entire model covered, primarily actually the top of a model. So I'm trying to sort of divide the model into its upper plates, and then sort of I'm going to go through the legs a little bit. But this was a lot of sort of, this project was a lot of sort of trying back and forth, so this is not going to be a straight and narrow road in terms of painting. Next, I chose to use a little bit of sepia ink from Vallejo. Now what you're going to see is I'm going to try to use that to sort of darken down some of the legs, and I think I even go a little bit underneath, trying to sort of define some sort of shadow, which wasn't super easy. And I'm also taking the plate sort of on the underside of the rust monster's sort of tail and plates. One other thing that was good with this was that if you don't let everything dry like completely, you sort of automatically get some nice blends. And you might be asking yourself, why are you seeing the same thing twice? Well, I have two rust monsters, so I'm doing them both. It was just that the camera angle was better on this one. And I think this is where I'm trying desperately to get some sort of shadow definition underneath it. And it's kind of tricky because there wasn't a lot of room there, but this is sort of what it looks like, and I'm sort of liking the result. And at this point I figure out that, you know what, I have a little bit of extra sepia in my palette. I might as well use it to sort of try to darken down the base, which comes with the model, which covers pretty much all of the sort of the normal black base. So I figured I might as well sort of try to sort of paint that. Now at this point I decided to use Army Painter's red tone in order to try to, let's see, what are those called, the sensing thingamajigs on top of its head, the mandibles or whatever they're called. I wanted to tint them red, so my first attempt was to actually just use a red wash from Army Painter. Not, you know, a big deal, so I wanted to do that on the actual, whatever they're called, the tendrils up front at the head, and also the ones closer to the tail. I'm not exactly sure what these are used for, but I'm gathering, and there I did a little oopsie. I'm gathering that this is sort of a little bit insect-like, so it's probably some sort of, you know, it's sensing its environment. Perhaps it's searching for metal to gorge down on and have a feast with. So anyways, I tried that, and I really sort of tried to get it into all of the nooks and crannies of those nice, you know what those actually remind me of? I don't know if anyone has fished, but it reminds me sort of the gills of the fish. So I think I was looking for that sort of intense red color, because it just, I felt like it would fit very well. Now once I've done that, this is what they look like. And they're, I mean, it's okay, it's all wet and sloppy put on, but there were some things, and here I'm using, I think, a darker shade of the same type of rust effect. There were a couple of things that I didn't really particularly like, and one of the things was that the plates, the way they were sort of ordered, I wanted there to be a little bit more of a difference in terms of intensity, in terms of the shades and whatnot. So I sort of went around the plates and sort of tried to darken the edges so we can get a little bit of a color differentiation between sort of where the edges meet. Naturally shadow would sort of happen there, and you would get a little bit more of a, yeah, I guess a little bit more of a pop, as it's called. So I'm just going through all of it just to get it a little bit more structure and just try to think about where shadow probably would land. I'm not an expert at this. I'm trying my best. So you can see here, like for instance there, I'm trying to put, sort of thinking that the light will come from, you know, up above, and I'm trying to sort of think where would shadows be. And even here at the top plates, shadows perhaps wouldn't be there as naturally as strong as I put them, but I wanted still there to be some sort of definition so that you could see the shape of the plates and the actual monster. And at this point I had a little bit more in my palette, and I decided to, you know what, I wasn't really happy with the legs, so I wanted to sort of actually paint the legs in a different color. Like I said, this project was very much going back and forth, trying new stuff out, which I really encourage you to not be afraid to try stuff. Worst comes to worst, you can always, you know, put your model in, we have in Sweden something that's called såpa, but I think in the US it's called not green stuff but power green or something like that. It's a fairly natural sort of detergent or washing chemical that you can use. You can usually strip down sort of models quite easily if you just have patience. The worst thing, I guess, is when you're stressed, if you need to, you know, have your models by Friday or whatever when game night is. But you usually don't, I would say, don't be afraid to try shit out. That's one great way of learning. As one of my idols, Kevin Smith, said when he quoted Wayne Gretzky, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So, looking at the two rust monsters, here we can see that all of the washes have started to dry, and I purposely waited because the next step, I don't want to have some wet sort of stuff here. But you can see that the, whatever, let's call them the tentacles, the sensing thingamathings, the tendrils, whatever they're called, they weren't, in my opinion, red enough. So I decided to go with some game ink from Vallejo again, and I'm using brown and red. And you can see that I'm actually putting it in two different places on the palette, and this is because and also I'm putting a little bit of water just to help improve the flow. I'm putting a little bit of brown into the red, and then I'm putting a little bit of red into the brown just to see sort of which color do I like the best. And I think I ended up with, so I would guess if you want to do the same, you would have a sort of even mix of brown and red, and like one drop each, because you don't need a lot. You know, this goes on quite easily. So and yeah, there again I did a little bit of oopsie, but you can see that all of a sudden this is becoming much more intense. You can sort of pick out the details a little bit more, which is what I wanted, because I'm thinking again of the sort of the thing I try to tell myself, that humans tend to watch or when they sort of I guess judge a shape, a monster, a humanoid, they look at the you know, the hands, the limbs, and the eyes. And one thing that I wanted to bring attention to was the sort of, yeah, whatever, these sensatory things that the rust monsters perhaps use. So I'm just going through and sort of just penciling in some red into these organs. I even consider having these, you know, once I use them for my players, having these sort of make some sort of perhaps a clicking sound. I don't know. It would be cool just to sort of try to role play these. But back to the painting, I would still say that putting some red and brown into them really, at least in my head, made them instantly distinguishable from the rest of the model, because this model is tricky, or it's easy and it's tricky in some ways. I've seen people sort of do similar monsters and just put one coat of sort of brown, red, copper, you know, wash on it, and then the problem is everything looks the same. Now, looking at the picture that you see, or the image on the back side, I saw that, well, we need to do something about them eyes. So my plan was to sort of pencil in the eyes with some matte white and then use some green ink to sort of try to get them to glow in a green haze. Now, I'm gonna be brutally honest. This was probably among the first times I really struggled to try to find the eyes. I think that the model, either the eyes weren't defined enough, or there was just something that made it really difficult for me to actually locate the eyes and really find them. So what I've heard tips from other people is that when you have trouble with that, you know what, I just went in with a whole lot of white and trying to sort of find that eye, because I knew that I always have the option to actually use, I hate to call it the eyebrows, or the eyebrow sort of section. I could use that to sort of make the eyes pop a little bit, because I seem to remember that the actual eyes on these models were quite small and I wanted them to be larger so they felt a little bit more sort of insectoid-like. Yes, I hate insects. Or not hate, I just sort of... I think it's a lot more scary when they have a little bit larger eyes. But at this point, I think I've done all I could with the white temporarily, so I decided to bring out some black and then pencil in some sort of shadow. And this was, as you can see, a little bit of back and forth, a little bit of black, and then I'm coming back with the white, and I'm trying to sort of find a good place for the eyes to sit. And being economical, I had some black left, so I decided to work on the rim of on the base and just paint that black. Now finally, when the white and the black had dried, I decided to go in with that green ink, as I mentioned before. And for me, this is just take a large brush, or a medium-sized brush, something that can hold a little bit more, and ideally it doesn't need to be that pointy, and just sort of dot it in there. And this is always scary for me because it feels like you can't fail, but at the same time it feels like it looks terrible when you put it in, because that glow effect doesn't really shine through until it dries. And I don't know, I've done this before with the yellow effect, and I think that one is probably the best, but this is what it looks like now, and you can see the faintest sort of more white in the center of the eyes. So I'm kind of happy with that. And you can also notice perhaps there is quite a lot of black around the eyes, and that was me trying to sort of make the eyes pop a little bit more. The idea came simply from watching actually people with makeup. They have that sort of sooty eyes, and then, or sooty sort of makeup, then bright eyes that makes the eyes pop, and it's the same here. So for the base, I had previously put on some sepia color, but I just felt like the base, or the ground the creature was in, was too damn similar to the actual color of the creature. So I decided to go, full on and just pick out some sort of other color, and it looked like it could have been stone. So I decided to go with Army Painter's Field Gray, just to get, a good solid coat of a different color, just to make the miniature, the actual monster, easily be differentiated from the base, because it just blended in too well. You can almost see where the monster started and the ground ended. So that's what it looks like when it was still a little bit wet. Now back with the matte white. I wasn't really happy with the eyes. They dry, they're fully dry now, but I just wanted to have a little bit more distinct hint, so I just put in the slightest white dots just to make them look a little bit more sort of fierce and a little bit more focused. And this is what it looks like, and as you can notice, the gray at this point had dried, so the only thing left for the actual base was to just give it a good coating of Nuln oil. I didn't want to go with Agrax Earthshade, which I normally would have done, but I was afraid that that would bring it back to the sort of brown color spectrum, and I wanted the base, as I said, to be very different from the monster. And with that, it was back to putting some black paint in the wet palette and just trying to work on the edge of the actual base, just to make it, you know, just to put a nice frame around this piece of art, so to speak. Here they are, and they're almost done, I would say. I'm quite happy how they turned out, even though it was a little bit of a roller coaster of a ride. And I think the next shot they're gonna be dry, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there we go. So that's what it turned out to be. I'm super happy with this, to be honest. I can see sort of the different body parts clearly, and with that, some glamour shots. Alright guys and gals out there, so these are my versions of rust monsters. Do you have boxes of shame, or do you like miniature painting? What do you think of my paint up? If you like it, please consider liking, sharing and subscribing this video. It's extremely satisfying to see when people sort of comment or like your work. I'm not an expert, but I'm trying to get better. And I hope that I'll see you next week again. And with that, I bid you a fond day. Toodaloo.